While I did intend originally on making a video on better food choices, instead I decided to switch gears and kind of talk about the reason why I prefer to train early in the morning, and that's mostly because my buddy here, cortisol. That's right, the steroid that you love to hate, but I love it. It's great. It's my friend. It's the grandfather's gifts, if you will, and I embrace it wholeheartedly because cortisol is not the sandbag that everyone thinks that it is. In fact, it's there for a very good reason, and that reason is to liberate energy in emergency situations. That's why, like last night for me, when you sleep like junk, you wake up the next morning with higher than normal cortisol, although you typically do have high cortisol release upon waking. It looks something like this, folks. Now, yours specifically might not track to exactly these same times or exactly the same amplitude, but it's something similar to that, where you see a spike upon waking and then it kind of trickles down throughout the day, especially after your first meal. Then you sleep, it gets its lowest, and then it spikes again when you wake up. Why does it do that? Well, you got to figure we didn't always have four walls and AC or heat, as the case may be, depending on where you live, and protection from unsavory elements and the weather and yada, yada, yada. You know, we lived in caves or under a tree or out on the plains or wherever, right? So we might be sound asleep, and then all of a sudden we're awakened by a growl or a forest fire or something about to fall on us or whatever, or something did fall on us, you know. There's no guarantee that you're gonna wake up fully rested in a nice comfortable bed in a state of nature. So you got to be able to scramble as soon as you open your eyes. That's why you have a cortisol spike upon waking. Now, most people take that as a sandbag, but my experience in the military has taught me a unique trick when it comes to cortisol, which is why cortisol is my friend. Here is the trick to making cortisol your friend, folks. You have to disassociate the discomfort of the task with the fact that cortisol is actually going to give you a little bit of an extra boost in performing that task. You see, one of the main things that cortisol does to liberate energy is it puts glucose back into your bloodstream. So for me, that typically eats a bigger dinner and then wakes up and goes to train, while I'm ostensibly training fasted, that's not actually the case because I have plenty of glycogen in my liver and my muscle tissues. When I wake up, that cortisol spike just dumps some of that sugar immediately into my blood. So I'm ready to go. Now, mentally, psychologically, I might not be so much, especially if I slept like junk, but physically, I can still perform the task if I can just grit through the discomfort of actually getting going in the first place. Because oftentimes in the military, you don't have a choice. You just kind of get used to doing that. And when you cultivate that practice, you can actually have some of your best training sessions when your cortisol is really high. Particularly things like conditioning sessions where the injury potential is a lot lower, although I've definitely had some PR lifts off of very low sleep as well and very high cortisol. Because one of the other things that cortisol does is it releases an anti-inflammatory cytokine, IL-10, which actually attenuates your immune response. So you would think that, you know, with reduced recovery, under poor sleep, high cortisol, you would get sore faster, you would fatigue a lot faster. But the combination of extra available energy in your bloodstream and natural anti-inflammatories, it makes for a recipe of you temporarily being able to push yourself much harder than you might have been able to otherwise if you can get your head in the game. Now, let's not get it twisted. I am not at all advocating to intentionally set up high cortisol situations so that you can try to cheat the system and benefit from a little bit of extra energy and natural anti-inflammatory. It's a fight or flight response. It's there for emergencies, not there to be used on a regular basis, because there is one massive drawback to this kind of training. And this is the main reason why I'm such a big advocate on sleep the older of an athlete I become, even though I can wake up and do quite a bit of work in a fatigued state. And that is that the stimulus to fatigue ratio of everything you do in a high cortisol state is way, way more than when you're fully recovered. I don't exactly know what the literature says. I haven't dug that deep into it, so I can't give you exact numbers. But what it feels like is something like you get 1.5 or 2x the fatigue per unit volume of effort. Or a better way to put it would be your increased fatigue is commensurate to how much cortisol you're producing in order to counteract how tired you actually are or how stressed out you actually are, whatever the case may be. Whatever it is that's causing the cortisol. And then the other, probably more important warning is do the math on this. You have increased acute energy, but higher rates of accumulation of fatigue, and then you have natural anti-inflammatories. That's a recipe for injury right there. When I was younger and more reckless, I used to think these high cortisol periods were almost like a superpower, and I would intentionally do my heaviest lifting under these conditions. I torn a bicep, I torn a pec twice. So training with high cortisol is not something that you want to plan for. It's not a cheat code. It's not something you want to do every day. And typically, if my cortisol is really elevated like today, I'll just do conditioning and have a really great one and then shut it down. But every once in a while, like today, I'll also lift. I'll just make sure that I intentionally do submaximal work so I don't tear myself asunder. So, all that to say, don't hate on cortisol. It's your buddy. It's there to help you. But it's like any other stimulant. If you abuse it, there's going to be a hefty price to pay. There's best use cases for just about anything, folks. But nothing beats sensible training, good nutrition, and recovery for long-term success and sustainability. So don't demonize cortisol, but don't abuse it either. And stay in the fight. Thanks for watching.